It was in the late autumn of '89, when the London fog lay upon the city like a muffler upon an invalid's throat, that I found my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, more than ordinarily restless. He strode across the hearthrug with that quick, pantherine step of his long fingers locked behind his back and his keen, ascetic profile cut clear as a cameo against the window, where the feeble daylight died in the vapors of Baker Street. "This weather, Watson," said he, halting abruptly and stooping to poke the fire, "is the ally of mediocrity. It is easier to hide a clumsy trick in a mist than in the noonday sun." I made no answer, for in my friend's mood an interruption is as profitable as a cough in a symphony. Presently he took up the morning paper which lay upon the table, and, as was his wont, passed rapidly from column to column with eyes that drank their fill in a single draught. He paused, and I saw a flash of animation lighten his features. "Here is a problem cast in a musical key, if I am not mistaken," he murmured. "Listen, Watson." And with that he read aloud a short item from the Gazette describing the disappearance, upon the eve of his farewell performance at the Royal Albert Hall, of Victor Albrecht, the celebrated violinist. "Only the instrument remains," the account concluded, "and that, when found, was murmuring as if with some ghostly after-sound." "Extraordinary," said I. "A stringed instrument will vibrate in sympathy with any neighboring source, but unattended, it argues contrivance." Holmes completed. "Our brothers of the yard will be sorely puzzled. I, at least, am grateful to Providence, which has sent a thin streak of color through this drab morning." He had scarcely finished when the bell below rang with a decisive summons. Mrs. Hudson, with that gravity of demeanor which the years had not been able to mollify, ushered into our sitting-room a lady of that peculiar type in which aristocratic breeding struggles with genuine agitation. She was richly attired for so sombre a day, but it was not her dress which first engaged my attention. It was the small right-hand glove which she held, and upon whose lilac kid there lay a pale dusting as of fine chalk. "Pray be seated, madam," said Holmes in his most soothing tones. "You do us an honor. You will find my methods abrupt, but, I hope, not inhuman. Lady Cecilia Harrow, if I mistake not?" The lady started. "Sir, we have never met." "No, but the ribbon at your throat shows the blue of the Harrow Trust. The crest upon your reticule is a harp, or rather a lyre, proper upon argent, and your carriage wheels are splashed with that peculiar reddish clay which I have noticed along the Bayswater Road, where your town-house stands. Add to these the rosin upon your glove. No woman, not even a great lady, would carry such dust unless stages were her natural province, and it becomes a matter of definition." She looked at him with an expression in which fear and relief were oddly mingled. "Then you know why I have come, Mr. Holmes. You have read of Victor Albrecht?" "Indeed." "You were the sponsor of his farewell concert." "My name stands upon the bills. If the concert fails, if he is not found, I am ruined in purse and reputation. I beg you, sir, find him." Holmes took up the glove with the tips of his fingers and held it to the window. "Rosin," said he, "and something more. A faint unguent, an oil not commonly sold." He dropped it lightly upon the table. "We must see the stage upon which this little tragedy has made its bow. The Royal Albert Hall, in the grey noon, has the cold and lofty melancholy of a cathedral deprived of its congregation. The silence gathered in its arches, and the red plush seats stared down as empty as the sockets of some great skull. Edward Cray, the stage manager, a man of gaunt frame and careful speech, met us at the wing. "There has been no disturbance," said he, "since the police sealed the place." Holmes's eye, which misses no more than a hawk's in mid-hover, travelled from prompt box to flies, from the downstage footlights to a plain, wooden chair upon which lay a violin of surpassing grace. Its varnish was mellow as old honey, and the bridge, the chin rest, the slim neck, all bore witness to the care with which its master had tended it. Holmes bent his head until the fine, nervous hair brushed the instrument. He made no attempt to touch it. "Hush!" he whispered. In the immense hush there came a thing like a sigh, a single, almost imperceptible tone, as if the air itself had fashioned a note in its throat. I confess I felt a quiver along my spine. Holmes's nostrils dilated. "It is no spirit, Watson," he murmured, "but a solvent whose vapor excites the string, aided by a filament that is not a string at all." His lens glittered. His delicate fingers, armed with a small forceps, separated one string which to my eye differed not at all from its fellows. "Horsehair," said he, "the finest, and here, feel the tack of a rare oil. I have smelled such only once before, in a laboratory off Old Compton Street." Backstage we found Mr. Cray more forthcoming. He had been nervous for days. Mr. Holmes said the violin spoke when it should have been dumb. Said he heard it in the watches of the night. Holmes's smile was not unkindly. A conjurer's whisper in a virtuoso's ear. The mind hears what it is trained to love, and what another mind is determined it shall hear. Then you think, I think, Mr. Cray, that illusions are like locks, they require a key. Tell me of Mr. Albrecht's dressing room. Locked from within, sir, window fastened, no other exit. Ah! The respectable phrase, locked from within, is the orphan of many a mystery. We repaired to the lodgings of Anton Ravel, once Mr. Albrecht's rival upon many a European programme. Ravel received us with that cold civility by which a sore spirit is defended against intrusion. His rooms were neat, almost severe. A metronome ticked upon the mantel, a single violin lay sleeping in its case like a sabre in its sheath. "You come about Victor," said he. "All come about Victor. You have met with him lately?" Holmes's eyes abode upon the other's hands. Ravel's lip curled. "We were not friends. And yet you have burnt your right palm, here, where a man would grasp a retort or a beaker." Holmes's forefinger hovered above a pale scar. Music and chemistry are poor bedfellows unless one seeks effects beyond either art. Ravel laughed without mirth. "You go too far, Mr. Holmes." "On the contrary, I go as far as a whiff of isoamyl nitrite and a trace of resinous oil will carry me. Good day." Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, thin, alert, and not without a certain honest obstinacy, which I had come almost to like, met us in the corridor which led to the performers' quarters. He pointed out the door to Victor Albrecht's dressing room. "Locked from inside, Mr. Holmes, with this bolt. We had it forced." Holmes knelt, his magnifying glass bright as an insect's eye. "Scratches, Watson, very fine, upon the bolt's face. And upon the window latch, note these shallow scores of that specific triangular outline which is made by the edge of a tuning key. A man may lock a door from the outside if he first draws the tongue of the bolt with such an instrument introduced by the gap and guided by a thread. The same, mutatis mutandis, for the window." Lestrade sniffed. "You'll be telling me next that the violin plays itself." "Not at all," said Holmes dryly. "There is an operator. The question is, what signal and what motive?" We brought the violin to Baker Street, where my friend, with that curious tenderness which I have seen him show only towards music or a singular orchid, established it upon a chair within our sitting-room. The night had fallen like a curtain. The lamp sent a mellow glow upon the litter of our life, pipes, papers, chemical files, those humble supernumeraries in the drama of our existence. It was past 11 when, as I penned these notes, a thread-like sound crept out upon the silence and set the hairs upon my neck upright. Holmes, who had been sunk in his armchair with his lids lowered, sprang erect. "You hear it?" "Yes," I whispered. "It is uncanny." "Uncanny only to ignorance," said he, though his voice was soft. He crossed to the window and, with a sponge, pressed a thin film of moisture upon the instrument's strings. The note swelled a little, then died. "Vapor reacts with an oiled filament," he explained. "One may reproduce sympathy without bow or hand." Whoever contrived this would convince an overwrought artist that his genius was haunted, and thereby herd him where he wished. On the following morning there came by the first post a letter in a feminine hand, but with a man's impatience in the slant of the characters. Its superscription was to Victor Albrecht. It had found its way to the hall and thence, by Mr. Cray's direction, to us. Holmes slit it and read aloud, "You cannot abandon what you promised. The performance will go on, whether you stand or fall. E.R." "E.R.R.," I mused. "Edward Ravel?" "Edward Ravel's baptismal names include a Anton," said Holmes. "But I do not quarrel with your instinct. There is an Ravel in this air, whether he be Edward, Anton, or a more shadowed relation." He turned the paper and sniffed it. "A mere touch of cologne. But the ink, aha, a cheap brand sold in a single apothecary's in Soho, where our friend Anton experimented. We found the little laboratory off Old Compton Street shuttered and dusty, yet it had that lingering odor, sharp, astringent, with a sweetish tail, which betrays a recent tenancy. Upon the bench were scattered notes, here an attempt to quantify the damp of a London night, there a diagram of a violin string annotated with metallic compounds and their resonant qualities. Holmes read with a growing light in his face. To set a string in motion by gas alone, note the use of a metallic filament in place of gut, the emphasis upon horsehair useful for drawing vapor along its length, and the curious insistence that the operator can be distant, so long as the flow of air is contrived. He stooped to a page by itself, upon which was written, in a tablature I could not read, a duet for 2 violins. Over it, in a different hand, were the words, "The final piece will be ours." "Not a solo, then," Holmes murmured. "A duet implies a partner, and a partner implies secrecy." A janitor of the hall, an old fellow with a face like a walnut and eyes that missed nothing, recalled for us that, upon many nights, he had heard the thin blades of 2 violins crossing in the air when Mr. Albrecht had supposedly practiced alone. 2, sir, like a gentleman speaking to his echo. "An echo does not correct a man when he falters," Holmes answered. "This echo must have had blood and breath." "But I never saw another," said the janitor stoutly. "Not I." "Then he was hidden where eyes are idle," said my companion. "Below, perhaps, or behind the slats of a vent." Lady Cecilia Harrow, whose composure, I saw, was of the kind that learns to stand upon trembling earth, received us in her drawing-room in Bayswater. While she and Holmes exchanged those courtesies which in England precede the invasion of sorrow, my gaze was held by a portrait upon the wall, a young man with Victor Albrecht's brow and mouth, but marred by a pale, slant scar that ran from cheekbone to jaw like the stroke of an angry pen. "You admire my late husband," said Lady Cecilia, coming to my side. "Richard Harrow." Holmes's back was to us, but I observed a quick stillness in his posture. "Richard," she repeated. "He died some years ago." Holmes turned. "Madam, may I ask, did you know Victor Albrecht before your marriage?" She lowered her eyes. "We were acquainted." "Music is a small world, Mr. Holmes." "And a close one," said he gently. We next received word from a waterman who plied his honest trade along the Thames that, upon the night of the disappearance, he had seen a gentleman of Victor's figure wandering the embankment with a violin case. The place, when we visited it, presented a ribbon of mud upon which Holmes, with that patient scrutiny which is his nature when once he is set, discovered the impressions of 2 pairs of boots, one of which dragged the left foot a little, as of a man who bore a hurt. There were 2, he said at last, and the second was half lamed, whether by birth or by accident I cannot yet say. See, too, the faint crescent where a case was set down. A white handkerchief, a lady's by the fineness of the cambric, lay caught in a weed. Holmes lifted it, held it to his nostril, and frowned. Chloroform. Our music grows darker. If there is a chill that even the stoutest heart cannot wholly banish, it is that which steals upon one when the possibility of foul play touches a friend's name. I had seen Victor Albrecht only upon the stage, but there is a kind of acquaintance forged between performer and auditor. I confess that night I slept ill. Holmes, in contrast, grew calmer as the danger grew. Emotion disturbs observation, he once said to me, therefore a peril is sometimes the physician of the mind. By the second morning he had devised a plan which took us once more to the hall. There we examined, with Mr. Cray's unwilling assistance, a vent below the stage by which, in elder days, a draught had been drawn to cool the house. Holmes disappeared within like a ferret after a rat, and I followed more clumsily. A short passage led to a low cellar, dry as a bone and smelling faintly of old canvas. Upon a rude cot lay the impression of a human figure, on the floor were scattered sheets of manuscript, written in 2 hands. A small tin trunk contained a few necessaries, and among them a cuff-link which bore the letters V.A. It is as I feared, said Holmes in a voice I had rarely heard from him. Here genius has hidden itself from the world, and from itself. When we regained the light, Holmes's face had the stern serenity which settles upon it when deduction has crossed that last invisible bridge, and become certainty. Watson, you will, I hope, forgive me if I speak without preface. Victor Albrecht had a brother, an elder, I think, born with his face, but not with his fortune. The scar in Lady Cecilia's portrait is the twin of one born by our hidden man. They were not rivals, as the world imagined, but partners in a conspiracy of talent, the one appearing, the other perfecting. The rehearsal at midnight was a duet, the hidden cellar, a home, the letter, the cry of a soul which cannot bear to see its gift extinguished. And Lady Cecilia? I ventured. She knew both. She loved, perhaps, the one who stood in the light, the other loved her from the shadow. Without envy? No. Love is seldom without its touch of gall. Lady Cecilia's confession, when at last my friend required it, was made with a dignity which moved me. She told us of the brothers, of Richard Albrecht, the elder, a prodigy whose early promise had been marred by a theatre fire in which his cheek was scored and his nerves, never robust, were shaken. It was Victor who had persuaded him to labor in secret, and Victor who wore the laurel that should, or so Richard thought, have crowned them both. I married, she said simply, and thought Richard dead. If I had known he lived, she did not finish the sentence. Holmes, with grave courtesy, forbore to complete it for her. There remains the truth, said Holmes, and the manner of saying it. There is a chord in a human heart which will answer to no touch but its own. I must contrive that the owner shall pluck it. Accordingly, upon the following night he caused to be posted about the city the announcement of a final, private rehearsal at the hall, admission to be by special invitation only. The Yard, whom Holmes half mollified and half deceived, agreed to hold themselves ready. We took our places in the wings. The house was a hollow shell, the lamps made islands of light upon the boards. For a long while there was no sound but that felt, rather than heard, hush which belongs to places where crowds have lately breathed together. Then a single note lifted, pure and imploring. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. Another answered, closer, fuller, human. A figure glided from the shadows at the back, spare, erect, with the unmistakable poise of a master. The scar upon the cheek shone like a line of pale metal. In his hands was a violin, upon his face, not triumph, but a terrible tenderness. He played. God forgive me if I cannot set upon paper what followed. There are moments when even a doctor's vocabulary fails. The second voice which rose, a whisper, an echo, a remembered phrase, was not of the living. Yet the duet was perfect. Holmes stepped forward very quietly, as one approaches a man at prayer. Richard Albrecht, said he, and at the name the player's bow faltered, you have kept a promise beyond the grave. Let the living now speak. The man's head drooped. I did not kill him, he said, in a voice that had once learnt the art of eloquence and had since unlearnt it in solitary places. He came to me, or here, upon the night before his triumph, and we quarrelled. Words grew hot, then deeds. A beam loosened above, we had condemned it, but we were poor men who knew rich music, and it fell. He cried once, only once, and then was still. I could not give him to the world as a corpse. I hid him where I had lived, below, until I could order my thoughts. I set the music stirring that he might not be altogether gone. I wrote to him that he must play, because I could not live if the duet were not complete. He sank upon the chair and laid the violin across his knees with a tenderness that was almost maternal. Holmes's hand rested for an instant upon the man's shoulder. There is no need to adorn the truth, said he gently. It is as tragic naked as it is in robes. What passed thereafter cannot be fully written. There are occasions upon which the law's majesty is best served by the law's discretion. Inspector Lestrade, to whom I bear witness that he is more humane than he allows, accepted Holmes's account and did that which spared a woman and a name. There was, after all, no malice aforethought, only that fatal mixture of pride, love, and mischance which has furnished both courts and poets with occupation since the world began. Lady Cecilia Harrow was spared the worst of the blow. She wore mourning, but her household did not become the market's jest. Of Richard I will only say that he was dealt with as gently as the times permit. We returned at last to Baker Street. The fog had lifted a little, one could see the yellow squares of the lamps along the street like a file of penitents on their knees. Holmes took his violin from its case, the honest, homely one which had seen us through many a quiet evening, and drew from it a melody of such sadness and peace as I had not heard from him since the affair of the 3 Garridebs. Watson, said he, lowering the bow, genius is a proud rider, but even he must bow to conscience. There is music in the bowing as well as in the rise. He smiled faintly. The note dies, he added, but the ear remembers. I sat long after he had ceased, and when at last the night closed round Baker Street, it seemed to me that the air still held the faintest tremor of a sound. Perhaps it was only the echo of a life, which, having gone wrong in the dark, yet found its last cadence in something like repose.